My name is Natalie, and I am 28 years old. The day we buried my father, I stood alone while my family huddled together, shooting me looks of contempt. My brother Mason smirked as he loudly announced, "She is just here for the money, but Dad was going to cut her off." Tears stung my eyes as laughter rippled through my relatives. Then the family lawyer walked in holding a USB drive. No one expected what happened next. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine. The relationship between my father and me had always been complicated. Richard Montgomery was not the warm, affectionate type even before my mother passed away. When I lost Mom to breast cancer at 15, something in Dad changed. He retreated further into his work, becoming more distant and focused on his business empire. Dad built his company Montgomery Innovations from nothing. He started in his garage with just an idea and turned it into a multi-million-dollar technology firm that specialized in security systems. Despite his success, he remained intensely private about his work and finances, even with his own family. All we knew was that the company was thriving, and we lived comfortably in our large suburban home. My brother Mason, 6 years older than me at 34, had always been the golden child. With his business degree and charismatic personality, he fit perfectly into the mold Dad created for him. After college, Mason joined the company and quickly rose to become the chief operations officer. Dad seemed to beam with pride whenever Mason closed a deal or brought in a new client. Their relationship was built on a shared vision for the company and mutual respect for the business world. Then there was my younger sister Samantha, 22 and impressionable. She worshipped Mason and followed his lead in everything, including how she treated me. Sam had been only 12 when Mom died, and without maternal guidance, she gravitated toward Mason as her role model. His influence over her shaped her perspective on family dynamics, especially regarding me. Unlike Mason, I had never shown interest in the family business. My passion lay in art and design. I spent hours in my room sketching, painting, and creating. Mom had always encouraged my artistic abilities, saying I had inherited her creative spirit. After she died, those quiet moments with my sketchbook became my refuge, my way of staying connected to her. When I turned 18, I made a decision that would forever alter my relationship with my father. Instead of attending business school like Mason, I enrolled in an art institute on the other side of the country. Dad was furious. "Art will not pay the bills." "Natalie," he had said, his voice cold and dismissive, "you are throwing away your future on a hobby." His words cut deep, but I stood my ground. "This is what I love, Dad. This is who I am." The argument that followed became the breaking point. Dad threatened to withhold financial support if I pursued art instead of business. I chose art anyway and walked out with nothing but a suitcase and my savings from summer jobs. For the next 10 years, our relationship existed in the realm of brief phone calls on birthdays and Christmas. Each conversation felt forced and awkward, filled with surface-level pleasantries that carefully avoided any mention of my career choice or his business. Mason would occasionally call to brag about his latest accomplishment at the company or to subtly remind me of what I had given up. Samantha followed suit, becoming increasingly distant. Our once close sisterly bond deteriorated into formal texts on holidays. The few times I visited home for family events, I felt like an outsider watching my siblings and father share inside jokes and company stories, while I sat silently on the periphery. Despite the estrangement, I built a life for myself. I worked multiple jobs, while attending school, graduated with honors, and eventually established my own small graphic design studio. I created album covers for indie musicians, designed logos for local businesses, and illustrated children's books. My work gained recognition in the art community, and I even won a prestigious award for an illustration series. But none of my family attended the ceremony, despite my invitations. Life continued this way until that fateful morning when everything changed. The phone call that would bring me back to a home that no longer felt like mine, to face a family that had become strangers. The call came at 6:30 in the morning. I was already awake working on a deadline for a client who needed illustrations for a children's book about courage. The irony of that theme would not be lost on me later. My phone vibrated against my desk, displaying a number I rarely saw: Samantha. My sister never called me, especially not at this hour. Something had to be wrong. Sam, I answered, my voice still raspy from a night of little sleep. There was a pause then, a sound that resembled a stifled sob. Dad had a heart attack last night, she finally said, her voice breaking. He is gone, Natalie. Dad is gone. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Despite our strained relationship, I had never imagined a world without Richard Montgomery in it. He had always seemed indestructible, a force of nature too stubborn to succumb to something as human as death. When I managed to ask, gripping my desk for support. Around midnight, Mason found him in his study. Her voice hardened slightly. The funeral is in 3 days. Mason thought you should know. The subtle dig wasn't lost on me. Mason thought I should know, not that they wanted me there. Still, I immediately booked the first flight home, canceling all my client appointments and projects. The journey back to Connecticut felt surreal. As the plane descended, I gazed out at the familiar landscape of my hometown, wondering how a place could feel both so familiar and so foreign simultaneously. A car service took me directly to my childhood home, now an imposing structure that seemed to judge my return. Mason opened the door before I could knock, his expression a mixture of grief and contempt. "So, you decided to show up after all," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Bit late as usual." I brushed past him, too emotionally drained to engage. I came as soon as I heard Mason. The house was filled with relatives and friends, all there to pay their respects. Aunt Judith, Uncle Thomas, Cousin Elizabeth, and dozens of others mingled in hushed conversations that abruptly halted when I entered the room. Eleanor, my father's sister, stood with her husband Walter near the fireplace, both watching me with undisguised disapproval. Samantha sat alone on the window seat, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she gave a slight nod but made no move to greet me. The message was clear: I was an outsider here, even in grief. Later that evening, as the visitors began to leave, Mason cornered me in the kitchen. His tie was loosened, and he clutched a glass of whiskey like a lifeline. "You know he asked for you," he said, his voice low and accusatory. "In the hospital before the second attack, he asked if anyone had called you." My heart constricted. The hospital? You never said he was in the hospital before he died. You made it sound like the heart attack killed him instantly. Mason shrugged, taking another sip. "Would you have come really 10 years, Natalie? 10 years of barely acknowledging his existence, and now you expect us to believe you care." "You should have called me," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I had a right to say goodbye." "Rights?" Mason laughed bitterly. "You gave up your rights to this family when you walked out. We both know why you are here now. The money. But you are in for a disappointment, sister." Dad was not a sentimental fool. He walked away, leaving me alone, with the devastating knowledge that I could have seen my father one last time had Mason made that call sooner. That night, unable to sleep in my old bedroom that remained eerily unchanged, I wandered into my father's study. The room smelled of his cologne and the leather-bound books he collected. I ran my fingers over his desk, imagining him sitting there just days ago, unaware his time was nearly up. In the bottom drawer, partially hidden beneath some folders, I found a leather journal. My curiosity overrode any sense of invasion as I carefully opened it. Inside were meticulous notes about the company, but interspersed between business entries were personal reflections. Many mentioned me. October 15th, saw Natalie's illustration in that magazine today. Bought 10 copies. She captured exactly what the article was trying to say. always had an eye for the truth behind things. March 3rd, Natalie won the Graphic Excellence Award. Wanted to call but did not know what to say. Pride feels foreign on my tongue these days. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, discovering a father I never knew existed. A man who followed my career from afar, who collected my published works, and took pride in my accomplishments, even as he remained silent. Tucked inside the journal was an unsealed envelope with my name written in his precise handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before his death. Natalie. Words have never come easily to me, especially words of emotion. Your mother was always better at expressing such things. In her absence, I retreated into what I knew: work structure, expectations. I failed to see that you needed acceptance more than direction. I was wrong about your art. I see that now. You have made a name for yourself through talent and determination, without my help or approval, perhaps even despite my disapproval. There is a strength in that which reminds me of myself, though you might not welcome the comparison. There are changes coming that I should have discussed with you long ago. Decisions I have made that will affect you and your siblings. Mason will not understand, but I believe you might. We are overdue for a conversation, daughter. One without the weight of old arguments and misunderstandings. The letter ended there, unsigned, unfinished. A conversation that would never happen now. Yet these words, incomplete as they were, gave me the courage to stay to face the funeral and the family that had made me feel unwelcome. I owed it to the father who had silently followed my journey, even if he had never found the words to tell me so in life. The day of the funeral arrived under appropriately gray skies. The service was held at St. Mark's Episcopal Church, where my parents had married 35 years earlier. Mason had arranged everything with meticulous attention to detail, ensuring the event reflected the status and wealth of Richard Montgomery rather than the man himself. The church filled with business associates, community leaders, and family members. I sat in the front pew, painfully aware of the empty space beside me. Mason and Samantha sat together further down the row, flanked by Dee Eleanor and Uncle Walter, presenting a united front of familial grief from which I was visibly excluded. The minister spoke of my father's contributions to the community, his business acumen, and his generosity to select charities. It struck me how little these formal eulogies captured of the complex man I had known both before and after discovering his journal. When it came time for family remembrances, Mason approached the podium with measured steps. His eulogy painted our father as a visionary businessman, a mentor, and a loving father who had taught his children the value of hard work and perseverance. He spoke of lessons learned in boardrooms and golf courses, of a shared passion for building the Montgomery legacy. My father put his heart and soul into creating something lasting. Mason said, his voice thick with emotion that seemed practiced to my skeptical ears. He entrusted me with his greatest creation, his company, knowing I would honor his vision and expand his legacy. The presumption in his words made my jaw clench, but I remained silent. This was neither the time nor place to challenge his narrative. After the service, the gathering moved to our family home for the reception. I stood awkwardly near the refreshment table, watching as guests approached Mason and Samantha with condolences while giving me a wide berth. The few who did acknowledge me did so with uncomfortable smiles and hasty retreats. Not exactly the prodigal daughter's welcome, is it? Dee Eleanor's voice startled me as she appeared at my elbow, her tone honey-sweet, but laced with venom. Though I suppose that parable requires genuine repentance. I have nothing to repent for, Aunt Eleanor, I replied quietly, determined to maintain composure. I simply chose a different path than what Dad wanted for me. Different path, she scoffed, taking a deliberate sip of her wine. You broke his heart gallivanting off to play with paints while Mason stepped up to help run the company. And now you show up expecting what? A piece of the pie you refused to help bake. Before I could respond, her husband Walter joined us, his imposing frame blocking my escape route. Richard was too soft on you, he said, his voice. carrying just enough to attract attention from nearby guests. If you were my daughter, I would have cut you off completely after such ingratitude. I felt eyes turning toward our corner, including Mason, who watched with undisguised satisfaction as his aunt and uncle publicly chastised me. Richard was many things I said carefully, but he respected my choices even if he disagreed with them. That is what real family does. D. Eleanor laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Respected. Is that what you call it? He barely mentioned your name these past years. Their attacks continued, becoming louder and more pointed, creating exactly the scene they wanted. Poor loyal Mason, dealing with his ungrateful sister, who had abandoned the family only to return when there might be money to claim. Just as I contemplated fleeing the reception entirely, an older gentleman with kind eyes intervened. He placed himself deliberately between me and my tormentors, extending his hand. You must be Natalie. I am Gregory Phillips. I worked with your father for over 20 years. Grateful for the interruption, I shook his hand. It is nice to meet you, Mr. Phillips, though I wish it were under different circumstances. Please call me Gregory, he said smoothly, maneuvering me away from D. Eleanor and Uncle Walter. Your father spoke of you often, you know. This surprised me. He did. Gregory nodded, guiding me toward a quieter corner of the room. Richard was not one to wear his heart on his sleeve, but he kept tabs on your career. That series you did for the Environmental Awareness Campaign. He had prints framed in his private office. Not the main one where clients visited, but his actual working space. Said it reminded him daily of what really mattered. Tears threatened, and I blinked rapidly to contain them. I never knew. He was proud of you, Natalie. In his own way. Gregory squeezed my arm gently, just as he was concerned about other matters, things he and I discussed in confidence. Before he could elaborate, Mason claimed the room's attention by tapping a spoon against his glass. He stood on the bottom step of the staircase, positioned to address the gathering. I want to thank everyone for coming today to honor my father. He began, his gaze sweeping the room, but deliberately skipping over me. Dad valued loyalty and commitment above all else. He built his life around those principles, surrounding himself with people who shared his vision and dedication. His eyes finally found mine cold and challenging. He often said that only those who truly loved him would stand by him through everything. I believe everyone here today represents that truth. Everyone who genuinely deserves to be here, that is. The implication hung in the air like a physical presence. Beside me, Gregory tensed, his expression darkening. Around the room, relatives and business associates murmured in agreement, several casting disapproving glances my way. In that moment, I had never felt more alone. Yet somehow, the discovery of my father's journal and unfinished letter gave me strength. I knew something they did, not my father had been reaching out in his own way before time ran out for both of us. As the reception continued, I endured more veiled insults and outright snubs. Samantha avoided me entirely, clinging to Mason, as if afraid contamination by association. Only Gregory offered occasional respite, sharing small anecdotes about my father that contradicted the cold, disapproving figure my brother portrayed. By evening's end, I was emotionally exhausted, but resolute. Tomorrow would bring the reading of the will, an event Mason had made clear he expected to be a final confirmation of my exclusion from the Montgomery family. Little did any of us know how wrong he would be. The following morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the stormy atmosphere that awaited us at the law offices of Bennett and Associates. Located in a restored Victorian building in the heart of downtown, the firm had handled the Montgomery legal affairs for 3 generations. I arrived exactly on time, having spent the night at a hotel rather than endure another evening under the same roof as Mason and Samantha. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where my siblings already waited, along with D. Eleanor, Uncle Walter, and 2 cousins who had always been close to my father. Mason sat at the head of the oval table, a position that telegraphed his assumptions about his place in the hierarchy now that our father was gone. He wore a crisp charcoal suit that screamed authority and confidence. Beside him, Samantha looked small and uncertain in her black dress, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Nice of you to join us," Mason said, as I took a seat at the opposite end of the table. "I was just telling everyone about my plans for expanding the cybersecurity division of Montgomery Innovations. The market is primed for growth, and Dad always said timing was everything in business." The casual way he discussed the company's future made it clear he considered his inheritance a foregone conclusion. The others nodded appreciatively, already aligning themselves with the presumed new power structure. "Sam and I were discussing property values last night," Mason continued, pointedly ignoring my presence. "Now that she will be able to buy that house she has been eyeing in Westport. Great investment opportunity, especially with the market trending upward." Samantha flushed with pleasure at being included in his vision of the future. "It is the perfect starter home," she added, shooting me a smug glance. 3 bedrooms, so room to grow when the time comes." Around the table, the conversation turned to anticipated inheritances. Eleanor not so subtly mentioned her admiration for my father's vintage Aston Martin, which he had meticulously maintained for decades. Uncle Walter expressed interest in the vacation property in Maine, a lakeside cabin where our family had spent summers when my mother was alive. "What about you, Natalie?" Cousin Emily asked, her tone suggesting she was merely being polite. "Is there anything specific you are hoping for?" Before I could answer, Mason interjected with a cold laugh. "Natalie is practical, if nothing else. She knows Dad revised his will years ago after she abandoned the family business. I imagine she is just hoping for a few sentimental trinkets." The truth was, I had given little thought to inheritance. Finding my father's journal and letter had shifted my focus entirely. If anything, I hoped to keep some personal items that might help me understand the man who had followed my career in secret while maintaining his distance in life. "I would like his journals," I said quietly, "and perhaps some photographs." Mason's eyebrows rose mockingly. "Journals planning to sell his business secrets to competitors." I chose not to respond, saved by the entrance of Harold Bennett, my father's longtime attorney. A tall, distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Bennett carried a leather portfolio and, to my surprise, a small USB drive. The room fell silent as he took his place at the table, arranging his materials with deliberate precision. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his deep voice commanding attention. "As executor of Richard Montgomery's estate, it is my duty to ensure his final wishes are carried out exactly as he instructed." He opened the portfolio and extracted a sealed envelope. "Before we proceed with the formal reading of the will, I must inform you that Richard made significant changes to his estate plan approximately 1 month before his passing. These changes were legally executed and witnessed according to state law." Mason shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease crossing his features for the first time. "Changes? What kind of changes? Dad never mentioned revising his will." Bennett regarded him steadily. Mr. Montgomery was under no obligation to discuss his estate planning decisions with anyone, including his children. "The documents are all in order." The attorney then held up the USB drive. Richard also prepared a video message to be played before the reading of his will. He was most insistent that everyone named in the will be present for this viewing. A tense silence fell over the room as Bennett connected the drive to a laptop and positioned it so everyone could see the screen. He pressed play, then stepped back, his expression unreadable. My father's face appeared on the screen and I felt a jolt of emotion. He looked tired but resolute. His steel gray hair neatly combed his blue eyes, so like my own, clear and focused. He sat in his study, the bookshelves I had run my fingers across just days ago visible behind him. "If you are watching this," he began, his voice stronger than I remembered from our last brief phone conversation, "then I am gone, and Harold is fulfilling his promise to me. I have never been good with emotional conversations, as my children well know. Perhaps that is why I have chosen this medium to say what needs to be said. He paused, seeming to look directly at each of us through the screen. I built Montgomery Innovations from nothing, working 80-hour weeks while raising a family and trying to be the man Elizabeth wanted me to be. His expression softened at the mention of my mother's name. I failed in many ways, especially after we lost her. Business was simpler than grief, so I retreated to what I understood. My father shifted slightly, his posture straightening. But a man reviews his life when faced with mortality, and my recent health scares have forced such a reckoning. I have made mistakes, particularly with you, Natalie. At the sound of my name, all eyes in the room turned to me briefly before snapping back to the screen. I was wrong to try forcing you into a mold that did not fit. Your mother always said you had to find your own way, and she was right, as she usually was. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. I have followed your career with pride, though I never found the courage to tell you so. Mason made a dismissive noise, but my father continued as if anticipating the reaction. As for the company and my estate, recent events have compelled me to reconsider my previous arrangements. Mason, I have been aware for the past 3 years of your systematic embezzlement from company accounts. The room erupted in gasps. Mason jumped to his feet, his face contorted with shock and rage. This is absurd. Turn it off. He was confused, obviously not of sound mind. Bennett calmly paused the video. Mr. Montgomery underwent a comprehensive cognitive assessment before making these changes precisely to prevent such challenges. The assessment confirmed he was of completely sound mind. Shall we continue? Mason sank back into his chair, his face ashen, as Bennett resumed the video. The evidence is all documented and has been provided to Harold, my father continued calmly. $320,000 diverted through fake vendor accounts, forged signatures on company documents, tax fraud that could have destroyed everything I built. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Around the table, expressions ranged from disbelief to dawning horror. Samantha stared at Mason, her lips parted in shock. Samantha, my father, continued, turning his attention to my sister. I know about the credit cards. $50,000 in shopping sprees, charged to company accounts that you thought I would not notice. You are young and easily influenced, but that does not excuse the behavior. Samantha's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she shrank into her chair. As for you, Eleanor and Walter, my father addressed my aunt and uncle directly. Your repeated attempts to borrow against my estate, your refinanced mortgage that I quietly paid off last year, your gambling debts. Yes, Walter, I know about. Atlantic City, all of it factored into my decisions. Eleanor clutched her chest dramatically while Uncle Walter's face turned an alarming shade of red. My father paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. Which brings me to the future of Montgomery Innovations and my estate. He looked directly into the camera, his expression resolute. Natalie runs everything. 3 words that changed everything. 3 words that caused Mason to lunge for the laptop, only to be restrained by Bennett's surprisingly strong grip. The formal will provides details, my father concluded. But I wanted you all to hear this from me directly. Natalie has demonstrated integrity and self-reliance, building her own success without compromising her principles. These are the qualities needed to lead Montgomery Innovations into the future. Harold has my complete confidence in executing these wishes. The screen went dark, leaving the room in stunned silence, broken only by Mason's ragged breathing and Samantha's quiet sobs. For several long moments, no one spoke. The accusations my father had leveled hung in the air like invisible smoke, choking and inescapable. Mason was the first to recover his shock, quickly transforming into calculated denial. This is preposterous, he spat, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. Dad was clearly manipulated, probably by her. He jabbed a finger in my direction. She swooped in at the end, filled his head with lies when he was vulnerable and sick. Bennett cleared his throat. Mr. Montgomery anticipated this reaction, Mr. Mason, which is why he instructed me to come prepared. The attorney opened his portfolio again and extracted a thick folder. This contains complete documentation of the financial irregularities your father mentioned. Bank statements, forged documents, transaction records, and the forensic accountant's report that traced the money to your personal accounts in the Cayman Islands. He slid the folder across the table. Mason made no move to touch it, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Furthermore, Bennett continued, I have surveillance footage from Richard's home office showing you accessing his private files after hours on multiple occasions. Dates and times are correlated with when certain documents went missing or were altered. Samantha looked at her brother in growing horror. Mason, tell me this is not true. Tell me Dad was wrong. Mason ignored her, his gaze locked on me. You turned him against me. All these years I was there, running his company, being the dutiful son while you were off playing with crayons. You could not stand that he loved me more, could you? He never said he loved you more, I replied quietly, the realization dawning on me as I spoke. That was always your assumption, just like you assumed the company would automatically be yours. Because he promised it to me, Mason shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Every day, for 10 years, we talked about my future as CEO. We made plans that apparently included stealing from him. Eleanor interjected, her loyalty shifting with the wind now that Mason's position was compromised. Richard would never have tolerated such betrayal. Mason turned on her with vicious speed. Rich coming from you, Eleanor. How many times did you and Walter come begging for money? How many loans that were never repaid? The room devolved into chaos as accusations flew back and forth. Samantha crying Uncle Walter and Mason shouting Eleanor, attempting to backpedal on her previous statements. Through it all, Bennett remained impassively professional, allowing the family to vent their emotions before continuing with the formal proceedings. I sat in stunned silence trying to process the revelations. Not just about Mason's betrayal or my unexpected inheritance, but about my father himself, the man who had followed my career in secret, who had recognized his mistakes too late, who had seen through Mason's facade when everyone else was fooled. A man I had never truly known, and now never would. Finally, Bennett raised his hand for silence. If we could proceed with the formal reading of the will, please. There are specific provisions that need to be addressed. Gradually, the room quieted, though tension still crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Bennett adjusted his glasses and began reading from the official document. I, Richard James Montgomery, being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils, and declare this to be my last will and testament. The formal legal language continued outlining the standard provisions before reaching the heart of the matter, the distribution of assets. To my daughter Natalie Elizabeth Montgomery, I bequeath 75% ownership of Montgomery Innovations, including all intellectual property contracts and assets associated with the company. Additionally, I appoint Natalie as Chief Executive Officer and Chairperson of the Board of Directors effective immediately upon my death. Mason made a strangled sound but did not interrupt as Bennett continued. To my son Mason Richard Montgomery, I bequeath 10% ownership in Montgomery Innovations, conditional upon full restitution of all misappropriated funds as documented in the attached financial report. Failure to make restitution within 90 days will result in forfeiture of this bequest, with the shares instead being placed in trust for charitable purposes. Bennett paused, looking directly at Mason. There is a private letter addressed to you with details on the restitution process. He turned back to the document. To my daughter Samantha Grace Montgomery, I bequeath 10% ownership in Montgomery Innovations and establish a trust fund for the completion of her education at the institution of her choice. This trust is to be administered by Harold Bennett, with the stipulation that funds be released only for legitimate educational expenses. Samantha wiped her tears, looking confused and lost as the foundations of her world continued to crumble. The remaining 5% of company shares are to be distributed among long-term employees, as detailed in the accompanying document. Bennett continued. My personal assets are to be divided as follows. He proceeded to list specific bequests: the house to be sold with proceeds divided between Samantha and me, the vintage car collection to be auctioned for charity, the main property placed in trust for conservation purposes. Eleanor and Uncle Walter received token bequests of family photographs, and little else, their expectations of substantial inheritance thoroughly dashed. Finally, Bennett concluded, I appoint Gregory Phillips as special advisor to Natalie Montgomery during the transition of leadership with compensation, as outlined in his separate contract. His institutional knowledge and loyalty to the true values of Montgomery Innovations will be invaluable in this period of change. As Bennett finished reading, the room erupted once more. Mason stormed toward me, his face contorted with rage. You will not get away with this, he hissed, leaning over me. I will contest the will. I will sue you for every penny. I built that company with him for 10 years, while you were drawing pretty pictures. It is mine. Actually, I said, reaching into my bag and extracting my father's journal. Dad built the company. You just took advantage of his trust. I opened the journal to entries I had marked, showing pages of my father's increasing suspicions and eventual confirmation of Mason's betrayal. He knew Mason. He knew everything, and gave you chances to come clean. You never did. Mason lunged for the journal, but Gregory Phillips, who had entered the room silently during the reading, stepped between us. That is quite enough, Mason. Your father documented his concerns to me as well, including the steps he took to verify his suspicions before making any accusations. You, Mason spat, recognizing my defender from the funeral. You were supposed to be loyal to him. I was Gregory, replied calmly, which is why I helped him uncover the truth when he asked for my assistance. Loyalty to Richard meant protecting his company from those who would damage it, even his own son. Samantha approached hesitantly, her eyes red from crying. Mason, did you really steal from Dad? Did you lie to all of us? The look he gave her was cold enough to freeze blood. Grow up, Sam. Business is business. Dad was too conservative, sitting on capital that could have been working for us. I was just accelerating the inevitable. Her expression crumpled at this callous response, and for the first time she moved away from Mason toward me instead. It was a small gesture, but a significant one. Bennett cleared his throat. If there are no further questions about the will itself, I suggest we adjourn. My office will be in touch regarding the necessary paperwork to transfer assets and company control. As everyone began gathering their belongings, Mason made one final attempt. This is not over, he promised, his voice low and threatening. Not by a long shot. But, looking around the room at the shifting alliances and revealed truths, I knew something was indeed over the illusion of the family we had pretended to be. What would rise from these ashes remained to be seen. The days following the will reading were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. As the shock of my father's revelations settled into reality, I found myself thrust into a world I had deliberately avoided for 10 years. Montgomery Innovations employed over 200 people, all now looking to me for leadership and direction. My first day at the company headquarters was surreal. The sleek, modern building downtown bore my family name in understated letters above the entrance. Security personnel greeted me with respectful nods, clearly briefed about the change in management. Gregory Phillips met me in the lobby, his steady presence a welcome anchor in unfamiliar waters. The executive team is assembled in the conference room, he informed me as we rode the elevator to the top floor. They are anxious to meet you, and no doubt confused about why the estranged artist daughter is suddenly their boss. I added, straightening my blazer nervously. Gregory smiled slightly. Your father was more transparent with the executive team than you might think. He began preparing them for this possibility months ago, though he kept the details vague. The conference room fell silent as I entered. 8 men and women in business attire regarded me with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. The empty chair at the head of the table, my father's chair now mine, seemed to demand more authority than I felt. "Good morning," I began, taking the seat with more confidence than I felt. "I know this transition is unexpected for all of us. My father made his decision based on factors that have only recently come to light, and I intend to honor his wishes by leading this company with the integrity and innovation he valued." One man who introduced himself as the chief financial officer leaned forward. "Miss Montgomery, with all due respect, your background is in graphic design. This company specializes in advanced security systems and technologies. How do you plan to address that knowledge gap?" It was a fair question asked, without hostility. "My father did not expect me to personally design security algorithms," I replied. "He built a team of experts in their fields, including everyone in this room. My role is to provide vision, ensure ethical practices, and maintain the company's reputation for excellence. For technical matters, I will rely on your expertise while I learn." The candid approach seemed to resonate. By meeting's end, most of the team appeared cautiously optimistic, though I noted 2 executives who had been particularly close to Mason maintaining a reserved distance. That afternoon, I toured the facility with Gregory, meeting employees and learning about current projects. In the research and development wing, I discovered something unexpected: a creative design department I had not known existed. "Your father established this division 3 years ago," Gregory explained, as we observed designers working on user interfaces and product aesthetics. "He said security technology was useless if people found it too complicated to use properly. He always cited your perspective on user experience, though I doubt he ever told you that." Another piece of the puzzle that was Richard Montgomery fell into place. My father had been listening all along, incorporating my viewpoint into his business, even while maintaining his distance. Meanwhile, Mason was not accepting his diminished role quietly. He attempted to rally employees loyal to him, spreading rumors about my incompetence and claiming I had manipulated our ailing father. When that failed to gain traction, he tried a more direct approach, confronting me in my newly occupied office. "You have no idea what you are doing," he snarled, barging past my assistant. "The Rothschild contract is up for renewal next week. Do you even know who they are or what they need? This company will collapse under your leadership, and I will be there to pick up the pieces." I met his gaze steadily. "The Rothschild Group has been our client for 7 years. They use our integrated security platform for 15 locations nationwide and are considering expanding to their international sites. Their main concern is seamless integration with their existing infrastructure." Mason's surprise was visible but fleeting. "Memorizing a client brief does not make you qualified." "Perhaps not," I agreed. "But surrounding myself with ethical experts and actually listening to them might. Something you struggled with, according to the forensic accounting reports." His face darkened. "You think you have won, but this is just beginning. I am contesting the will. Dad was not of sound mind when he made those changes." "We both know that is not true, Mason. The medical evaluations are conclusive. But if you want to drag this family through a public legal battle that will expose your theft and fraud, that is your choice." After he stormed out, I discovered he had also been attempting to access sensitive company files, presumably to delete evidence or extract valuable information. IT security had blocked his efforts, following protocols my father had quietly implemented months earlier. Samantha's reaction to the revelations about Mason evolved from denial to anger to a confused sort of grief. She had idolized her older brother, modeling her values and perspectives after his. Learning of his betrayal shattered her worldview. A week after the will reading, she appeared at my temporary apartment, looking younger than her 22 years, in jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual designer outfits. "Can we talk?" she asked tentatively when I opened the door. Over cups of tea, we had our first real conversation in years. She asked questions about my life, my career, my perspective on our father, questions that revealed how completely Mason had controlled the family narrative. "He always said you hated us," she admitted, staring into her cup, "that you thought you were better than us because you were artistic, that you laughed about how Dad would eventually forgive you and welcome you back." "None of that was true, Sam," I said gently. "I missed you. Every birthday, every Christmas. I thought about calling but feared rejection. Dad and I had fundamental disagreements, but I never stopped loving any of you." Tears filled her eyes. "I found out yesterday that Mason convinced Dad not to attend my high school graduation. He told Dad I said I did not want him there because he would embarrass me. But I waited all day for him to show up." Such casual cruelty designed to isolate and control had been Mason's method for years. As we talked, I began to understand how thoroughly he had manipulated us all, playing on my father's emotional reticence and Samantha's need for approval. At the company, I faced the daunting task of understanding the business while addressing the damage Mason had done. Financial irregularities extended beyond his personal embezzlement. He had made risky investments without board approval, entered questionable contracts with suppliers who provided kickbacks, and neglected key client relationships that did not serve his personal interests. Gregory proved invaluable during this period, his institutional knowledge helping me navigate complex business relationships and technical challenges. Together with the executive team, we developed a stabilization plan that would address the most pressing issues while maintaining business continuity. In the midst of this corporate storm, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I established a new initiative within Montgomery Innovations, a foundation that would use our security technology to protect endangered art and cultural artifacts around the world. The Montgomery Arts Preservation Project would combine the company's technical expertise with my background in art, creating something unique in the industry while honoring both sides of my father's legacy. When I announced the initiative at an all-company meeting, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Employees seemed energized by this new direction that maintained our core business while expanding into meaningful new territory. "Your father would have been proud," Gregory told me afterward. "He always said innovation comes from unexpected connections between different worlds." Mason made one final attempt to undermine my leadership by approaching our largest client, directly offering to start a competing company that would better serve their needs. The client's CEO promptly reported this to me, expressing concern about Mason's ethical standards and reaffirming their commitment to Montgomery Innovations under my leadership. With this final bridge burned, Mason disappeared from our lives, though his lawyers continued to file motions contesting the will. Each was systematically dismissed based on the extensive documentation my father had prepared. As for the family home, I decided against selling it immediately, as the will suggested. Instead, I invited Samantha to continue living there while completing her education, now redirected from the business degree Mason had pushed her toward to the marine biology she had always secretly wanted to study. Dad knew, she told me one evening as we sorted through his belongings. Somehow he knew I was miserable in business school. There is a note in his desk calendar about researching marine biology programs dated just a month before he died. The Richard Montgomery I was discovering through his papers and effects was a far more observant and thoughtful man than the distant father I had known. He had seen us all clearly in the end, even if he had not found the words to express it while alive. 6 months after my father's death, Montgomery Innovations had not only stabilized but begun to thrive under the new direction. The Montgomery Arts Preservation Project had garnered international attention, with museums and cultural institutions around the world seeking our specialized security solutions. Employee morale had improved significantly, particularly after I implemented a profit-sharing program that my father had drafted but never enacted. On a personal level, the wounds of the past were slowly healing. Samantha and I had established a genuine sisterhood for perhaps the first time in our lives. She had moved into an apartment near her university but visited regularly, bringing stories of her studies and newfound passion for marine conservation. Mason remained a shadow on the periphery of our lives. His legal challenges had all failed, and he had refused my offer of a structured rehabilitation program that might have eventually allowed him back into the company under strict supervision. Last we heard, he had moved to the West Coast and was attempting to start a rival security firm, though without success. As for the rest of the family, Dee, Eleanor, and Uncle Walter maintained a cool distance, their embarrassment over my father's revelations keeping them away from family gatherings. Other relatives had largely followed their lead, though a few had reached out hesitantly, testing the waters of reconciliation. One rainy afternoon, I found myself alone in my father's home office, now preserved as a kind of memorial. Gregory had suggested I might want to review some old project files stored there, but my attention was captured by a locked cabinet I had not noticed during previous visits. The key was hidden exactly where my mother used to hide all important keys, taped inside the nearest lampshade. A family secret I was surprised my father had maintained after her death. Inside the cabinet, I found dozens of folders, each meticulously labeled with my name and a date spanning the 10 years of our estrangement. The folders contained clippings of every published work that featured my art printouts of online mentions of my studio, photographs of gallery showings. I never knew my father had attended, standing quietly at the back before slipping away, unnoticed. There were notes about potential clients he had subtly directed toward my studio through mutual connections, never taking credit. At the bottom of the cabinet sat a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of letters, all addressed to me but never sent. Unlike the unfinished letter I had found earlier, these were complete, dozens of them chronicling my father's thoughts, regrets, and pride in my accomplishments over the years. April 10th saw Natalie's mural downtown today. The colors reminded me of Elizabeth's garden. Our daughter has her mother's eye for beauty and my stubbornness, not sure which will serve her better in the long run. September 3rd, Mason suggested cutting Natalie out of the will entirely today, said she had abandoned the family. I let him believe I agreed, easier than explaining what I cannot put into words even to myself. Some betrayals are unforgivable, but a father loving his daughter is not one of them. December 25th, another Christmas without the family complete, sent Natalie the usual impersonal check. Cowardice, not indifference. Someday I will find the courage to reach out properly. Time is not endless, as my doctor reminded me today. The last letter was dated just days before his final heart attack. I have made the changes to my will. Bennett thinks I should tell you in person, but some conversations are too loaded with old hurts and misunderstandings. Perhaps this final act will speak for me when words have failed. I have always seen you, Natalie, even when you thought I looked away. You are your mother's daughter, but you are mine too. Remember that. Tears streamed down my face as I read letter after letter, discovering the father. I never truly knew a man who had loved imperfectly but completely, who had watched over me from a distance of his own creation, trapped by pride and regret, until it was too late. That evening, as I sat in the garden where my mother had once tended roses, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months, the painful revelations, the unexpected inheritance, the responsibility thrust upon me. All of it had transformed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. My phone buzzed with a text from Gregory informing me that the board had unanimously approved our latest initiative, a scholarship program for young artists interested in the intersection of art and technology, named in my father's honor. Another piece of healing, another bridge between worlds. In my father's study the next day, I discovered one final surprise. Hanging on the wall behind his desk in a position visible only when seated in his chair was a framed sketch I had drawn at 16. It depicted our family mother still alive, all of us together on the main lakefront property laughing in the sunshine. I had given it to him for Father's Day the year before my mother died. He had kept it where he alone could see it every day, a private reminder of what had been lost. The lesson my father taught me too late for him to know I had learned it was that love does not always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it hides behind gruff exteriors and business meetings. Sometimes it watches from a distance, clipping newspaper articles and attending gallery openings incognito. Sometimes it makes terrible mistakes and lacks the words to make amends. And sometimes love makes one final gesture that speaks louder than all the words never said. In the end, I chose not to be defined by the years of estrangement, but by the connection that had existed all along, unspoken but real. I chose to honor both the artist my mother had nurtured and the businesswoman my father had recognized in me before I saw it myself. I chose forgiveness not just for my father, but for Mason, for Samantha, and most importantly for myself. The company continues to grow, expanding in directions my father might never have imagined, but would, I believe, approve of. Samantha graduates next spring, already accepted into a prestigious marine research program. Life moves forward, shaped by the past but not imprisoned by it. Sometimes I still talk to my father in the quiet moments, telling him about new projects or challenges, imagining his practical advice delivered with that hint of a smile he reserved for rare moments of pride. In those conversations, the words flow easily between us, all the barriers finally removed. What would your relationship with your parents look like if you could see the love behind their actions even when it was imperfectly expressed? Have you ever discovered that someone cared more deeply than you realized? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that love sometimes speaks in unexpected ways. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most important words are the ones we finally find the courage to say.